Turn to the book of Jonah, and we'll go through all 4 chapters rather quickly as we just have a little bit of time here, but some great lessons in there. And as we go through and learn some of these lessons, that it is that we will apply them to our lives. We'll find out first what the Bible says, and then some lessons from that. Well, you know the story of Jonah pretty well, but here's the lesson. Big fish and bigger God. If that's all that we learn, that's enough. Although we have some times in our life when things don't go as well as we think that they ought to, and that would be the big fish. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 40, Jesus calls it a whale. And so I'll call it a whale. Sometimes it is that we say a whale, and you say, no, Jonah says big fish. It doesn't say whale. But you look at Matthew 12, and it says whale. And so if I use whale, it's all right because Jesus did. And so, but big fish, bigger God. Because it is in the book of Jonah, we kind of have the heavenly veil rolled back, and we see the actions of God. And we see some of the things that are continuing with God, the interaction between Jonah and Nineveh and the men on the ship and God. And it's not oftentimes that veil is rolled back and we see that it was just not a wind that came up, but God sent the storm. And God prepared the fish. And so it is that we see kind of behind the scenes of things happening. And I think that is amazing as we talk about that. But Jonah, big fish, bigger God. Now someone a long time ago, this is not my original sermon outline, but I have it written in my Bible, and I like it so much, I'm going to use it today. And so the outline of Jonah goes like this. Next slide. And so you look at outline of Jonah, chapter 1, running from God. When we talk about the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh. And we know what Jonah did. Jonah ran from God. In fact, he went to Tarsus, or on his way toward Tarsus. And so it was that as he got the word, and he knew the word, and he knew where Nineveh was, and he said, I'm not going to Nineveh. I'm going the opposite way. He's running from God. We know that things didn't work out well with that. As he went and got on the ship, the ship was in the middle of a storm, and the sailors were there. They cast lots to see what was the cause of this. The lot fell upon Jonah, and so they threw Jonah overboard, and he was swallowed by a great fish. Chapter 1. Running from God doesn't always work out well. Chapter 2, running to God. In the belly of the great fish that Jonah began praying. Jonah, in chapter 2, as you read through that, Jonah quotes make references to several passages in the book of Psalms, some in Lamentations, but things are not going well with Jonah. He said, my head is just wrapped around with seaweed. Some people would say, well, did a fish actually swallow Jonah? Do you really believe the Bible? Sometimes people would talk to someone about believing the Bible or not, and sometimes this story would come up. Do you really believe a fish swallowed Jonah, 3 days later vomits him up on land? And I say, yes, I believe it. This is not just some bedtime story that people would tell others about obedience toward God. It's not some allegory, it is, as it's used in some ways to represent some other people. That I believe there was a man named Jonah. There was a great fish prepared. I believe the city of Nineveh repented. I believe it actually happened. In fact, Matthew chapter 12, as I made reference to earlier, Jesus said when the Jews asked for a sign, he said, there shall no sign be given unto you except that of the prophet of Jonah. He was in the belly of the whale 3 days, and so the Son of Man shall be in the grave 3 days. Jesus made reference to a real historical activity. It happened. And he said, I will be like Jonah. running to God, and then running with God. Chapter 3. Oh, Jonah is ready. He goes to the city of Nineveh. He preaches a message. He said, 40 days and the city of Nineveh shall be destroyed. For whatever reason it was, he did not want to go to Nineveh. And I believe that there are several reasons. One is Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian nation. Assyria was the powerhouse nation as they began to go and conquer the world. They were a very wicked people, very vicious people. They, if you talk about the deeds that they would do toward their enemies, they would find cruel ways to put them to death. In fact, it is that God would said to Jonah, because the wickedness of Nineveh has come up before me. Now, don't think of the rest of the world was pure and righteous at the time, and only Nineveh was wicked. It just represented the wickedness and the cruelty of the nation of Assyria. Assyria came and captured the 10 tribes to the north and led them off into captivity. Led them off, and they described that they would lead their captives. They would put hooks in their mouth or noses and lead them along the line. They were very cruel toward how they would put people to death and torture them in many ways. We read later on in chapter 4 of Jonah running ahead of God, because he had said this about chapter 4, verse 2. Running ahead of God. You see, Jonah preached to Nineveh. Nineveh repents, from the least to the greatest. The king and all the people repent. Can you imagine a revival like that? If we have someone that repents and comes forward and wants to become a Christian, and we rejoice if that happens every couple of months, and we think, well, we are really spiritually active here. Can you imagine a city, 3 days journey to get through the city, and everyone repents from the least to the greatest? You know, God's word is powerful. And it's like Jonah said, I knew, chapter 4, verse 2, I knew that you were a gracious God. I knew that you were merciful. I knew that you were slow to anger. I knew that you had this great kindness. And I knew that if they repented, you would not destroy them. And I added that last part because that's what he intended to say. I knew, that's why I didn't want to go and preach to them, because I knew if I preached to them and they repented, you would not destroy them. Running ahead of God. You see, Jonah thought he knew better what would happen to the people better than God did. And he's running ahead of God. And Jonah sits up on the mountaintop and pouts because the people of Nineveh repented and God did not destroy them. And so while Jonah is sitting up there, God causes this gourd to grow and offer him shade. And then the worm comes and chews through that, and the gourd falls out, and the hot sun and the wind beat upon Jonah, and he's moaning and bemoaning the situation. And God says, you care more about the gourd and the shade that it offered than the souls of Nineveh. He's running ahead of God. That's real quickly an outline of the book of Jonah. I like that. Running from God to God. He comes back. The word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, is how chapter 2 begins. And then running with God. Well, we're preaching God's message to people who need to hear it, and then running ahead of God. Things weren't, Jonah thought he knew better than God how he ought to interact within people. But let's look at Jonah chapter 1. And I like this outline also, because we have God's patience, God's power, God's pardon, and God's passion. In Jonah chapter 1, and we'll look through this and then apply it to our lives. Because God didn't tell us to go to Nineveh. And we're not fleeing unto Tarsus. And we're not going to be swallowed up by some great fish, I hope. And it is that we're not going to question God about God's ways and God's actions between other people and how they deal with them and not deal with us. And so what does it say to us? What lessons can we learn from the book of Jonah? Let's look at this. Now the word of the Lord, chapter 1, came to Jonah. Jonah means dove. And you think of dove, there are several things. What do you think of? You may think of peace. You know, the sign of peace is a dove. You may think of a bird that's flying away. That's a dove. Jonah, the son of Amittai. Amittai means truth. The son of truth. Now think about this. Amittai is proud of his son Jonah. In fact, it was Jonah who God speaks to. God doesn't speak to everyone. But here he speaks to Jonah. He chooses Jonah to do a specific mission. Can't you see, Daddy? My son. God spoke to my son and sent him on a mission, a personal mission. God spoke to him. Amittai means truth. He's a good man. And yet, here it is, his son, chosen by God, chooses to go the opposite way that God says. He said, go to Nineveh, for their wickedness has come up before me. They're wicked people, terrible people, did many wicked things. And look at chapter 1, verse 3. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Isn't that silly? Can you ever flee from the presence of the Lord? Psalm 139, whither shall I go from thy presence? Or flee from thy spirit? If I go up to the heavens, thou art there. If I go down to the depths, you are there. He was just saying, wherever I go, you are there. Isn't it silly to try to hide from the presence of the Lord? Yet, what happened with Adam and Eve? Remember when they sinned? And God comes walking along the garden. And Adam says, we hid from you. People have been trying to hide from the presence of the Lord from the very beginning of mankind. Jonah does it. We think we can do it too. We think, no one will know about this. No one will see this. No one. But God knows. We cannot hide from God, from the presence of the Lord. He sought to flee from the presence of the Lord. And he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. Let me tell you, here's a great lesson to remember. If we are fleeing from doing the will of God, if we turn from the will of God, there's always a ship waiting to take us. Now listen to this. Young people, you're choosing friends. Who's going to be my friend? Who is it that I will want to be a good companion with, I want to hang around with and do what they do? And, your mom and dad are like, well, choose Christian friends, choose people who will help you go to heaven. And you say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to take a ship toward Tarshish. I want to go the opposite way. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, evil companions corrupt good morals. And you say, I don't want people that will help me build good morals. I want to go the opposite way. And there's a ship willing to take you there. Sometimes it is we make decisions about, things in this world that are hard to handle, and I just like to drink and get drunk and forget all my worries. People become addicted to alcohol, or drugs, addicted so much that it controls their life. And they cease to do the will of God. And they take that ship going the other way. We have troubles and trials and tribulations in this life, and we can choose to do what God wants us to do, or we can take that ship going away from God. It's always ready. It's always there. It's always your choice. God allowed Jonah to make that decision. And so he found a ship headed toward Tarsus. And it said, so he paid the fare. Now there's a ship always ready to take you away from the will of God, but there's always a fare to be paid. There's a price to be paid taking that ship. Sin will cost us more than we ever wanted to pay. Take us farther than we ever wanted to go and keep us longer than we ever wanted to stay. There's a price to be paid running from the will of God. And he paid the price. And it was, we read verse 3 where it says, but Jonah rose to flee into Tarsus. And then verse 4 starts with this, but the Lord sent a great wind. It's like, did you see that? But Jonah ran from God, but God sent a great wind. It's like, but Jonah did this, but God did this. You see, God is not through with Jonah yet. Aren't we glad he's not through with us? Aren't we glad that whenever we turn and run from God, that God is not through with us, that God gives us a second chance? But Jonah did this, but God did this. Now, oftentimes when we are caught up in sin, we think, well, it's my decision, and it's between me and God. It doesn't involve you, but yes, sometimes it does. You see, it was Jonah's decision to turn from God's will, but look at the people it involved. Can you imagine his mother and father, if they were still living, the pride that they would have whenever they would say, well, God spoke to my son and sent him on a mission. And then to hear, well, my son fled from God. What about the sailors on the ship? But God sent a tempestuous wind, so much as the ship was about to be torn apart, and the sailors began to pray, and Jonah is asleep. And they said, wake up, pray to your God, we'll find. And they cast lots, and it fell upon Jonah. And they said, well, who are you, and what do you do? And then Jonah confessed. Somewhat confessed. I'm a Hebrew, he would say. He didn't say I'm a prophet of God, sent by God, although yes, he did. Because they told him that he ran from God. Verse 10, for the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord because he told them. But you see, he caused calamity upon other people because of his decision. Sin affects more than just you. That's a great lesson. You may say, well, listen, it didn't matter. It's not your decision it's me and my life, and I'll make the decisions that I want to make. And yeah, sometimes it affects our family, friends, acquaintances. Jonah put in peril the sailors in the ship. Our decisions and our actions do affect other people, whether for God or from God, running from God. You think of the children of Israel as God told them to go and march around Jericho, and they had that great victory, and the walls came tumbling down. But God had said, when you go to Jericho, that city is mine, and it's dedicated unto me. Don't you take anything from that. Everything there is dedicated unto me. But there was a man named Achan, and he saw some goodly clothes, and he saw some gold and silver, and he took that and he hid it under his tent. He thought, no one will ever know about it. It doesn't affect anyone but me. But yet the next time that the children of Israel went to war to the city of Ai, they were defeated. Men lost their lives because there was sin of Achan. It affected other people. It's not just you in your relationship with God alone. It affects others. But God sent the wind. They said, yes, Jonah said, it's me, throw me overboard. He did. God prepared the big fish. I like chapter 2, verse 1. Then Jonah prayed. Then Jonah prayed? After he's thrown overboard and a big fish swallows him, he gets serious about God? Well, sometimes that's when we are in the depths of the great fish, when there's darkness all around us, when it seems like there's no hope around us, then we turn to God. Why didn't he turn to God before that ever happened? We could say that over and over and over again. Why is it that people wait till they're in the belly of the fish before they pray to God? Why is it that we wait till we're down to as far down as we can go before we turn to God? I don't know, but it happens. But another lesson is from this. I'm so thankful that whenever it is that we are down in the belly of the well, that there is a God that we can pray to, and he listens. When we don't know where, we don't know what the next moment's going to be, we don't know where we can turn, yes, we do. God listens to our prayers. He's ready. There is a God that we can pray to. Then Jonah prayed. And he talks about his prayers. He talks about you read through chapter 2, how overwhelmed he is, and he didn't know what's going to happen. But he prays to God, and God listens. Verse 9 says, "But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay the vow I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord." I don't know what sacrifice it was that he would say, that he said of his voice. I don't know what vow it was that he had said, but sometimes we have to reach the very depths of the lowest of the low before we say. Maybe it was he'd say, God, if I ever get out of this, I will go to Nineveh. You got my attention right now. I don't know if that's what the vow was. That would be what I would be saying. You know, God, if you get me out of this situation, I'm yours. Sometimes, that's what it takes before we turn to God. Chapter 3. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. According to the word of the Lord. Why didn't he do it the first time? I don't know. Why don't we do it the first time? According to the word of the Lord. That's all we have to do. God speaks. We listen. Good things happen. According to the word of the Lord. But I'm so glad it starts off with this. And the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time. Someone once said God is the God of second chances. And he is. He didn't give up on us. And we shouldn't give up on him. And so we know that the city repented. Jonah had a little contrast with God and about them repenting and God forgiving them. And instead of, well, why is it sometimes that we are jealous when good things happen to people? When God forgives them. Jonah was a little jealous. They didn't deserve forgiveness. They were too wicked to forgive. You know, I've talked with people that believe that they have done so much sin that God could not possibly forgive them. I've been in sin so long, how is it that God could possibly forgive me? Or maybe it is that not just a life of sin, but they have done something, one particular thing that they just can't get over, and they say, God would never forgive me for doing that. The story of Jonah is Nineveh in their great wickedness. All else, they repented, and God forgave. I don't care what sin that you think is great. There's no sin greater than God's mercy and kindness and forgiveness and love. And God forgave. Some great lessons from the book of Jonah. Many others, we could liken it unto us today. God didn't say, go to Nineveh. But God did say, go into all the world and make disciples. And he just didn't say that to the preacher or just to the elders or just to our Bible class teachers. He said it to every one of us. And there's every one of us that would say, you know, I'm not going to tell God no. I'm not going to say no. I will not go and teach others. I'm not going to turn from God and run away from God as far as obeying the Great Commission. But you know what, God? I'm just not going to do it today. I'm just going to delay that a little bit. I don't feel comfortable today going out and talking to someone about you. I don't feel like it today that I'll go and teach someone about Jesus. And so I'm not going to run from you. I'm not going to turn away from that, but I'm just not going to do it today. And when does delay become disobedience? I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to run from it. Sir, oh yes, that speaks to me. I'm going to do it. I'm a Christian. I'm going to do exactly what God says. I'm going to go and teach others, but just not today. Could it be that Jonah would say, oh God, I'm going to go to Nineveh, but just not today, instead of running from God? He turned and ran from God. He went the opposite way of Nineveh. How many times do we turn when opportunity is given and we hesitate? We wouldn't say we disobey God. We just hesitate. We come up with reasons. They're not interested in learning about God. They're not spiritually minded. They're not interested in going to church or learning. Or we come up with all kinds of reasons why we shouldn't speak the word of the Lord. And I hope it doesn't take a great big fish to bring us to our senses. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. We have this opportunity today forward. Think about Jonah. Think about God. Think about opportunities. Are there people today who need the word of the Lord? Are there people today? Go ahead and bring the next song up, an invitation song. What about our lives? Opportunities, actions. Think about Jonah. Is there anything that we could do to not be like Jonah? To be more in according to the word of the Lord? I hope that we convict ourselves to say, that touched me. I need to do better in talking to others. I need to share my faith. I need to be bold and not run from God. I never thought I was running from God, but you know, maybe I am. Maybe I'm looking for that ship to take me away from God. If we can help you and encourage you and strengthen you, that's what we're here for. We're here to build each other up and encourage one another and strengthen one another, and we all want to go to heaven. If there's any way that we can help you and encourage you, won't you let that be known as we stand and as we sing?